All right, joining me now, one of the more popular wrestlers out there and made big news recently, jumping from WWE to AEW. Got a lot of buzz for that. He is Bryan Danielson. Bryan, how's it going?
Going great. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for coming on. Are you getting a lot of people? I assume most people are still calling you Daniel Bryan. What's going on with the name now? Is it a little confusing?
Well, it's weird because for a long time, people who have known me, because I've been wrestling since 1999, and I was Bryan Danielson for 10 years before I was in WWE. And so for a long time, my friends who had known me before had a hard time calling me Daniel Bryan. Like people on
Right.
commentary would call me, oh, and Brian's out there doing this or whatever. And I guess that's Daniel Bryan's last name, but it was kind of weird context. So
Yeah.
it is, I'm sure it's hard for fans for sure, especially because obviously WWE introduces you to millions of fans. But for most of the people who know me, a lot of people just call me Brian anyways, so it's not too hard of a deal.
Yeah.
But but yeah, so I'm sure for some people it's tough. For me, it's not a thing. I'm just like I've signed autographs as Daniel Bryan and Bryan Danielson. I'm not worried about it.
I'm not ashamed to admit I was a big Total Bellas and Total Divas fan, and obviously Nikki and Brie on the show always called you Brian. So that always threw me for a loop since you were always Daniel Bryan in WWE. So,
Yeah,
but
what
I that was like the introduction to Bryan Danielson.
what threw people more for a loop is when somebody like Cody Rhodes would call me Dirty Dan, and then all of a sudden, then all of a sudden, it gets thrown way out of whack.
Yeah. So let's start with just the basics. It's pretty simple. I mean, I think you may have done it before, but for anyone who's a little bit unfamiliar, why the jump from WWE, where you were for a very, very long time, to AEW, which has obviously a ton of momentum going for it right now?
Yeah, there's not an easy answer. Most of the difficult decisions in life are very complicated, but at the end of the day, it came down to two things, and it was uh, one was just the excitement of it, right? Like there's something about it as I thought about it, as I weighed the decision, that made me a little scared to go to AEW. Like I was so comfortable in WWE. I had so much fun and I loved it there. But there was something that I saw and I was just like, oh, that excites me, but it also makes me a little bit nervous. And sometimes that's a good sign that it's something that like, hey, you might be a little bit too comfortable in your life and like, let's go try something new. Let's push your boundaries. And I guess that's the other thing is that I really wanted to be able to, this is probably going to be the last full-time run of my career. And I really want to be able to push the limits of what I'm able to do. And AEW is really good at that. You're going to have to like those guys are doing so much incredible stuff that if you want to be at the top of AEW, you really have to elevate your game. And so that's kind of where it's at.
Did you have any, what's the word I'm looking for, trepidation or concern of debuting so close to right after CM Punk? Did you think it would have been maybe better to space it out? Do you think I mean, to have you guys debut back to back, obviously for AEW, enormous. But was there any thought process like, should we do this 1 week after Punk, or should we wait a little bit and get as much juice as we can?
So I leave that kind of stuff up to the businessmen. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
the hardest part for me was just making the decision. And then once I made the decision, I told Tony Khan, I said, hey, whenever you need me, you know what I mean? Whatever you think is best, and so I thought it worked out really well. I think the compounding surprises and the compounding debuts really like just pumped a lot in right away. And not just me and Punk, but also Adam Cole, Ruby Soho, all that kind of stuff. It was, I think, All Out was a pretty incredible event and an enormous success.
Yeah. So what are you most looking forward to doing here in AEW?
Oh gosh, I mean, I have a whole laundry list. One, I feel like my match against Kenny Omega feels like the biggest match in my career. It's like it's this huge shift for me as far as a new company. The first time I've wrestled a match outside of WWE in over 10 years. It's against the guy who I've watched. Like, I watched outside stuff while I was in WWE. I love wrestling. And I watched Kenny Omega in Japan just become one of the best wrestlers in the world. And I was just like, man, one day I'd love to have that match. And now I'm actually getting it. And there's also this idea of if we do a great job, like, and I'm not just me and Kenny, but if the whole crew at AEW Grand Slam does a great job, there's going to be a lot of new viewers, and that's a great opportunity to build more momentum for AEW. So yeah, I'm excited for that because it feels so huge and like an enormous moment. But I'm excited about wrestling. There's a lot of people I haven't wrestled before, and one of my decisions too was, in WWE, I'd wrestled most of the people on the roster. And this is like, there's a ton of people I haven't wrestled, or a ton of people I haven't wrestled in over 10 years. And it just seems excited. There's the veterans like John Moxley, who I'd love to do one with, Cody Rhodes, Chris Jericho. There's those guys. But then there's also the young guys. Of course, there's Darby Allin and Jungle Boy and those type of guys. But Dante Martin's 20 years old, right? And like getting in the ring. I remember being spry, right? One time I wasn't as spry as Dante Martin. He's really spry, but getting in there with those guys and pushing them and them pushing me, because it goes both ways.
I think you're still pretty spry. I mean, you've had so many, obviously, big injuries, but you're still pretty. You can. I mean, yeah, I think you have to be of a certain age to be spry, but I think you can still pass for spry.
Yeah, I do well given the circumstances.
Yeah. You've only been in AEW obviously a little bit. You still have to have your first match. When this comes out, you would have had your first match. But what are you noticing biggest differences between WWE and AEW from sort of backstage, creative, production, anything like that you're noticing?
So it's a little more relaxed. People are walking around. I don't know, a little bit less stressed, I would say. Sometimes, in WWE, like, I've had a lot of great times in WWE, but sometimes there are some more stressful moments. I haven't seen that yet in AEW, although I'm sure there will be. I mean, anytime you're producing live television, there's going to be stress. And whenever people are competing for positions, there's going to be stress. There's also like the difference. Like I love Vince McMahon. I do. He's great, but he's very stoic, right? So like, and when I went out right before at AEW, Tony Khan was like, "Bryan, let's go."
Never got that from Vince.
Yeah. No, I mean, I had incredible conversations with Vince, and like when he gives you his approval, it's a different form, but when I saw Tony there and like he's like wild-eyed and like so excited, it was funny.
Listen, you said obviously the stress is a little less there in AEW. I would assume, I don't want to be a bad host and put words in your mouth, I would assume a lot of the stress in WWE has to do with Vince. I mean, he's this mythical figure at this point in the world. Give me like, if you can, give me like what was the most stressful moment you had in WWE with Vince, or something that, put you on edge or caused you a little like, what's going on here?
So some people are stressed by Vince. I never really have been. I think the hard part with WWE is the constant change in the show. So like you think from a writer's perspective, right? Or so I'll give you an example. We on SmackDown, we would go on at 8 p.m. live, right? And I had a promo, and like, so it's 7:30, and then all of a sudden I'm like, hey, we want to change the promo to this or whatever it is. And it's like, oh no, like I've just got like, I have to redo all this. Or it's like, I think for some talent, it's the idea of are we going to be used? Are we not going to be used? What do I need? Walking on. I think there's also a feeling sometimes walking on eggshells. Like if you do the wrong thing, somebody's going to see it or whatever, that sort of thing. And I don't know why that specifically is the case, but and some of it comes from, I think people fear Vince in a way that maybe they shouldn't sometimes. Like one of the things that I think is I wish people could see Vince more how I've gotten to see him, in the sense of the humanity, and that sort of thing. But it's hard because you can't, as Vince, you can't have everybody walk into your door. You know what I mean? There needs to be some sort of barriers and that sort of thing. And so yeah, it's
you said you thought, and you didn't mean this as a knock. I'm not putting that out there. You said you thought Vince was overprotective of you. Was that in terms of not wanting you to take dangerous bumps, and in terms of your health? Is that what you meant by that?
Yeah. I'll give an example. So first I want to say this by saying, like, okay, I think their story of me, and which they believe, is that I'm injury prone just because of but the reality is I've been wrestling for 21 years. I've had one surgery, which was my neck surgery, which I was out for 9 months. And then I was forced to retire due to multiple concussions. But all the concussion doctors had cleared me, and that was concussions over the span of, at that point, 15 plus years. You know what I mean? And so I haven't had that many injuries, and I'm really durable. And especially when you compare me to, say, Triple H or John Cena or all these other people, like, hey, I haven't had any problems with my knees or anything like that, that sort of thing. All of that said, Vince is very protective of me in almost like a fatherly type way. So I was wrestling Drew Gulak at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view right before the pandemic started in 2020. I took a German suplex that went a little bit wrong, and I landed on my head. When I got to the back, Vince was so mad at me. And he was like, and it wasn't anything about the performance. It wasn't anything like, I said, was the match, after you got mad at me, I said, was the match okay? And he goes, yeah, the match was great. But you can't do that, right? Like, he doesn't want me. He didn't want me to get hurt. And I saw it, it like, you don't want your boss to be mad at you, but I saw it as coming from a very loving perspective.
Can you give us an imitation of what he says to you when he's pissed off at you like that, when you come back through the curtain? You could drop the curse words too if you want.
I also think he never really got so mad at me, but that one moment, I was like, I think it was more incredulous. It was like, God damn it, Bryan, what are you doing? Why would you do that? Like, everybody has better Vince impersonations.
Yeah. I'm curious because I had Roman Reigns on this podcast about a month ago, and he told me he's not scripted. So I have in AEW. What's the promo situation there? Can you go out there and say what you want? Are you scripted? Are you giving notes? And then towards your end run there in WWE, you said they could come to you right before a show and change things around. So I'm just curious. End of WWE run now in AEW. What are you scripted? Can you do your own promos? Where do we stand with that?
So I was actually a little bit blown away because my first time I had to talk or anything was in Cincinnati, and I was like, so what are we doing? I don't know. What do you want to do? Wait, what?
When was the last time you heard that question?
And then last time or last week in Newark, it was the same thing. So and you get there and there's no I was never handed a sheet of paper. I was never told what we're doing. We kind of sit down and decide what we're doing. And I was just like, oh. And then there's this overarching fear for me a little bit, because some people don't like working with the writers. I loved working with the writers. I like collaborating, right? Like I had a really good time with that. Like, actually, one of my favorite times was I was a bad guy in WWE as the Planet's champion. And I
was going to mention that. Yeah, that was great.
And the writer worked with Robert. We had so much fun. And he would present me with a piece of paper, and then I had a lot more leeway than a lot of people in WWE. So it was like I would work with the writer and be like, hey, what if we say this? What if we say this? And Robert was great because he would pull me back from the edge. Sometimes I'd go off on a tangent like, hey, this is too far environmental and maybe not focused enough on the show that we're actually doing.
Yeah, see, as a fan, I hate that. You should have gone to me, it was so great. You should have just kept going and going and going with it. It was such a great gimmick.
Yeah, well, but I think Robert helped me stay on track. Eventually, I wasn't allowed to say anything about the environment at all. But Robert was great because he would throw in little things there, that sort of thing. And so I loved collaborating with the writers. So there's a real fear of the blank page, right? The writers thing of like, hey, you have to craft your own story, and like you want that freedom. But then all of a sudden, it's like, oh no, here's this blank page. You can create whatever you want, and you're like, and that's a little bit nerve wracking. And so, yeah. But the last couple of months with WWE, I would get scripts, and I'd work with but my time in WWE has been pretty much that, like always working with a writer, but always collaborating,
Yeah.
And in the last couple of months, I was part of the creative team a little bit. And so sometimes, very rarely would I do my own stuff, but like, hey, what if I said something like this? And I might have said that on a Tuesday. I'd show up on the Friday, and then it would be like somebody else's words, but like a version of what I had kind of mentioned. And then we just flesh it out, work together, and it was fun.
You don't seem like the type that, and I probably shouldn't assume that because you're a very creative guy, but in WWE, they really went strictly PG. And AEW, obviously, I think they push the limits further, which is way more enjoyable. I mean, when I talk about having Roman on, Roman got, I guess, a little flack because he said John Cena was like the missionary position, which seems like a harmless line to me, a good line. But are you looking forward to pushing the envelope in AEW a little bit and maybe going, either maybe PG-13 or R with promos, or that's not Bryan Danielson's way?
Well, I've already the SHIT word on TV, so but I think it's all circumstantial. Like it's not something I don't look forward to using curse words, or I don't like anything.
Right.
But the one thing that I do look forward to doing is not having to worry about PG in the sense of the actual wrestling. Right. You know what I mean? Right. And don't worry about, you can just get a little bit more intense and a little bit, I hate to use the word violent, but a little bit more violent.
Right. Yeah.
In AEW. And I think in wrestling, sometimes that's called for, right? Like when you have the big grudge match and you do the stuff like people want to see. I think one of the WWE is when you start doing like the Hell in a Cell matches and then there's no blood or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Big built up feud sort of thing. But yeah, I'm excited for that.
I always thought it was fascinating as a wrestling fan that you seem like just the nicest guy in the world, and if people follow you on social media, environmentalist, and you've got the 2 kids, you seem like a great dad. And you once got, I don't know, fired's the technical word, but let go maybe from WWE because you choked someone with a cable wire or something, which I don't want to do like the insulting thing and be like wrestling's fake, but like you weren't really choking the guy out with the wire. He wasn't going to die or pass out, and they still you got in trouble for that. It seems so ridiculous that ended up happening to you all those years ago.
Well, to be fair with that specific incident, I legitimately choked him because
well, maybe you should have gotten fired.
Justin announcer, and I knew him a little bit, but I came from the idea, the background that like, hey, we have to make this look good, and if he doesn't know, like I can't trust him to be great at what I do, which is like the pretend part of it, right? So, and they wanted a gang style beatdown, so I wrapped it up, and he had big marks on his neck after.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And so that said, but I think that is an aspect of my personality that pro wrestling has really allowed me to explore, especially pre-WWE, is the is the more aggressive side of me, because for the most part I try to stay very calm and very chill. I don't want to be angry, right? And so, but sometimes it's nice to be able to get that aggression out, and pro wrestling allows you to do that in like a safe way.
What do you make of, obviously there's this huge narrative, and I think so many people are so hung up on the old WWE versus WCW days and Monday Night Wars and all this, and everyone, with AEW doing so well and making WWE move NXT, and obviously ratings have been strong. You and Punk there now. Everyone, I think it's just tired and cliche. Competition. I mean, I think both companies at the end of the day just want to make as much money as possible. But talk to me about the competition. Do you think it's a real thing? Should AEW worry about WWE? Should WWE worry about AEW? As someone who's in it now on both sides, what do you think?
Well, I think from a business perspective, you do have to worry about being number one in your genre, in the sense of how much you get paid for the TV rights fees, which is essentially both companies' business model. No longer fully about how many people that you can attract to the show. It's no longer about live attendance. It's no longer specifically for WWE. It's not about pay-per-view sales hardly at all. With AEW, right, that's still a big part of their business model. But the more viewers you can attract and that sort of thing, the higher price you're going to get from the networks as far as for your show. So where that's really going to come to pass is, I think, in 2 to 3 years when these contracts come due, WWE's with the USA and Fox, and then ours with TNT and Turner, and so that's where that really comes in from a competition standpoint is those big dollars. But where I'm mostly interested in it as far as like elevating AEW is, I think it's great for wrestlers. I think it's great for wrestling fans to have different products, and different products that are that focus on different things, right? Some people like their wrestling this way. Some people like their wrestling this way. From a wrestler perspective, this was the same thing that happened with WCW and WWF back when, I was in high school. Like Chris Jericho, wasn't being used hardly at all in WCW. And then he goes to WWF and is able to show his talent. You look at somebody like Malachi Black in AEW or Ruby Soho, where they weren't utilized very much in WWE. AEW gives them a chance to come over and show people how skilled they are. And eventually it will go the other way too. There will be people in AEW who feel like they're underutilized and will jump to WWE, and people will be like, whoa, like they maybe missed the boat on that one, but that's just going to happen. And I think that's good for the fans. I think it's good for the wrestlers. I think it's a really fun time to be in the industry. This is actually, I think, the healthiest the industry's been in the time that I've been wrestling, because for the most part, it's been mostly a monopoly as far as big wrestling.
Yeah. It's funny. The fans seem way more consumed with the competition, I think. I mean, what you laid out is all true, but it seems, I get the impression, I mean, you can confirm, I get the impression that fans want you to shit all over WWE and Vince now that you're with AEW.
After all, I cut a little promo and I said, I loved where I worked before. And that got a huge chorus of boos. But it's true. And I think, but I think that also speaks to it's not just a wrestling culture thing. I think there's also like a tribalism in our country right now, the narrative of being on one side or the other. And I think most people are actually very rational and will enjoy both sides. But I think the harder edges, and those are the people who tend to speak out more. If you like both, you're not going to go on social media and say anything controversial that's going to get a lot of responses, right? Like you say, AEW was great last night, but I really enjoyed this about WWE as well. Nobody's going to say anything, right? But as soon as you just do one or the other, and so I don't know. It's I think that's one of the negatives of social media is that it tends to emphasize the harshness in either direction.
Yeah. Last thing, because I know I got to let you go. I've always wondered this. When you had that just amazing run the Yes movement and taking over Raw on your way to winning the title at WrestleMania, where they had to famously change the whole plan because the fans just would not accept anything else. There were two unbelievable moments during that. There was the Raw takeover where everyone you had all the people with the Yes chant, you were on the Raw. And then there was another night where Triple H and Stephanie were cutting a promo with all the former champions in the ring. And the crowd was just relentless chanting your name. Which of those two did you enjoy? Those two moments did you enjoy more?
The one where all the champions were in the ring. And why? That was in Seattle. So I'm from not too far from there. And that was the last time my dad ever got to see me wrestle. And so it was, so like the whole arena, and that it was for most of the night. It wasn't just for that segment, but throughout the night, there would just be random Daniel Bryan chants. But now we're in the main event. We're building to this thing, John Cena versus Randy Orton. Everybody's just going crazy for me and chanting my name. And my dad knew I was like a good wrestler, but he never saw me like that before. Right. And then after the show goes off the air, good guys are waving hands and I'm going and clapping hands. And my dad was like a couple rows back and he runs up to me and just gives me the biggest hug. And till the day he died, he ended up passing away a couple months later. He would always tell my sister, like, I couldn't believe it. Like, it was unbelievable. And he signed his first ever autograph that day because he was boss and his boss's wife. And like, as we were chanting, like, this is Daniel Bryan's dad. This is Daniel Bryan. And so it comes up, and a couple people wanted his autograph. And so he would put Buddy Danielson, Daniel Bryan's dad.
I'm so glad I got to ask you that question because I didn't know. I just remember as a fan watching it in the ring and thinking like, this is unbelievable. They can't even finish this segment. But you had that story on top of that night. What a night for you. That's tremendous.
Yeah, and I think when you talk to wrestlers versus from watching it from a fan perspective, the things that are the favorite parts of our careers also have some sort of emotional entanglement with it, right? Something like that sort of thing. So yeah, it was really special.
Yeah, great moment. I appreciate you coming on. Good luck with AEW, and everyone listening obviously can check out AEW Wednesday nights and Friday nights on TNT. And good luck. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Be well.